Hello everyone, this is Brad Wood, and today I'm going to show you system setting expansion namespaces. Ooh, sounds fancy. So system settings are a feature of Command Box that sort of wraps together several features all together, and it's kind of named generically system setting. What the heck is that supposed to be? But basically system settings allow you to access any of the following things from inside of Command Box using the same sort of kind of solidified syntax. So environment variables from the current executing command. So whatever command is currently running in Command Box may have some environment variables that it's set, and these are Command Box environment variables. Or environment variables from the parent command. So if a command calls a command that calls a command, each of those commands have their own names, not namespace, but their own environment variable collection, and they can override the parent ones. Or global shell environment variables. So for instance, in Command Box, when you just type something like set foo equals bar, you're creating an environment variable that lives for as long as your Command Box shell is open. You can see I have 3 environment variables. These 3 come from my global env file, and here's the one I just set. So I can access foo using this $ curly brace syntax, right? Value var, or I can even use that environment show command. I can just give it the name of the environment variable, the name of the environment variable that I want. My goodness, and you get the same thing there. So those are the first things you can access. If none of those reveal anything, then Command Box will keep searching, and it will look for a JVM system property that belongs to the actual CLI process itself. And yes, you can start Command Box with custom JVM args. And if that fails, it'll look for environment variables from the actual operating system process that Command Box is running inside of. And so we can see that if we say, env show, and I can output like my path variable, right? So this is just my regular, like everyday Windows path. Or to show an example, the other one, like os.name, is an example of a Java system property that just lives there. So this kind of generic system setting concept in Command Box just wraps up all of the above, checking them in this order. So you can use the same syntax to get any of those items. So in addition to the actual operating system environment variables, Command Box environment variables, JVM system properties, there's also some expansion namespaces, which I call, and that basically just adds even more functionality into the same syntax. So you can also access any property from a server.json file dynamically through these, any property from a box.json file, any arbitrary JSON file, to be honest. Doesn't even have to be a server or box.json, just an old config file you have laying around this JSON. Any config setting, like the kind you would view with the config show command. You can also access any server info properties, so basically the details about a server that's been started. And that's what you get when you use the server info property equals something command. And other properties in the same JSON file you're currently executing it. So what this looks like is basically you have a little namespace here, server.json dot, and then the name of that thing. So in my current working directory here, I have a server.json file, and we have a name, right? My server. And so obviously I can say, server show name. Oops, I got to spell it right. Server show name, and it'll say, it's my server. But if I want to use this value dynamically inside of a script, I could use backticks and actually execute the server show, name command, which is a little wonky. Or I can use our server JSON namespace, where inside my little, $ curly brackets, I have server JSON dot name, right? And so what happens then is, seeing as how there's not any JVM system properties or environment variables named server.json.name, because if there were, it would have used them first. Then it'll say, oh, look, this is a server.json namespace. Let me go read the server.json file in the current working directory if it exists, and pull the name property out if it exists, and use that. So this doesn't require us to have any sort of, subshells or backtick expansions, executing commands. We can just directly access that via the namespace. And for what it's worth, if you just wanted to poke around, you can always just pass these same expansions into the env show, and you'll get the exact same behavior as before. So that's our server.json. And I mentioned this earlier, but just to be clear, if you specify a key but doesn't exist, you will always get an empty string back from the system settings. And of course, I'll use this syntax. If I have a non-existent key, you can also always do the colon and have a default value here. And so just remember that little trick. We can always do that default value. So we can also do the same thing with the box.json, and the namespace is simply box.json. So I have a box.json here in the current folder, and I can echo out system setting, and I'll use the box.json namespace, and I'll say .slug, and there's the slug property from the box.json living in whatever the current working directory is that this is executing. Obviously, you're probably not going to be doing this just with echo. You're going to be putting this in package scripts or server scripts or recipes or anything, dynamic that you're executing from a static command box. And you want to be able to, pluck these details out of a related config file. And of course, the arbitrary JSON files works the same. Basically, I can use this simple JSON namespace and the name of the property inside the JSON, and then let me double check the syntax. Yep. And then I use an @ and I can use the name of the JSON file that I want. So here I'm getting the name property from the box.json file. So this can be an arbitrary file name of anything you care for. We also have config settings, which work in the same basic method. So I can say config show verbose errors, and we can see that I have my config settings set to false. So I can also access that via system settings with, double check this config setting dot, and then whatever the name of the config setting is that I want to access. It's also worth noting that if you specify, well, so we can drill down. So actually, let's do this. So config show the commands. All right, so if I do config show command.aliases, right, we can drill down. So I can do command.aliases docker. So we can drill down the same manner here. So config setting dot command dot aliases dot docker, right? And just keep drilling down like you would any other time. And if we reference a top level struct or array, then you will just literally get JSON back from this of whatever that entire, nested object is. Okay, same thing for server info. Now, the difference between server info and server JSON is the server JSON can only access what's in the server.json, right? So I can type server show name because there's a name property in my server.json. But if I say, server show app.server home directory, this is a valid property in the server.json, but it doesn't exist, right? It's not defined in the server.json. However, when we use the server info command, the property, this has all of the running values from the last time we started the server. So I can always come in and say server info property equals server home directory, and I can always see that. This is a bad example because there are no servers started in this current folder. Here, I had a server earlier. I'll just do a quick dry run start just to define the server without actually starting it. Okay, so now server info property equals server home directory. As long as the server's actually been started in this folder, you can always access the server info properties regardless of whether or not this is specified in the server.json. So that's an important thing, to note. If you want to know what port the server started on, but you don't know that it was necessarily defined in the server.json, you want to always use the server info because that'll always tell you what the port was the server was started on. So same thing applies here then. We can echo out system settings, and this time it's server info dot, and I'll use my server home directory. And so I can access that through our little server info thing. Server info by default will grab whatever server is defined in the current directory. It is possible to have more than one server in the current directory. If you do server list local, it'll show you. In fact, look, here's a good example. I have a server rules server and I have a my server that have both been started in this exact same directory. So when I type server info, which one is it going to show? This is kind of a toss-up. You just get whichever the first one it is that it finds. So we can specify the name to our server info. So server info dot server home directory at specific server name, right? We can drill down, and of course the default value can also be tacked on at the very end. But it's also worth noting if this system setting is being expanded in the context of a package script or a server script that's server specific, like an on server start type of server script, then command box will be smart enough to know that you want the server info of whatever the current server is that's actually running, the server that fired the package script. So command box will be a little smart in that case if there's actually a server like literally in the middle of starting, and as part of a package script we want to resolve this. It'll know what you want. And then finally, this is kind of a handy one. You can reference any other property defined inside of a JSON file. So one of the primary use cases for this was, let's say we had kind of a long, gnarly string, and we didn't want to copy and paste that multiple times inside of our server.json. So here I have a couple different package scripts, right? Both of them run CF format. Both of them had this list of file globs, and I only wanted to find it once. So here I make up just an arbitrary property called app file globs that has, my string. And then using a little @ sign inside of our $ curly placeholder, we just reference the app file globs key from inside of the same JSON file. So this one you would obviously only use inside of a JSON file because it's sort of a self-referencing idea. But this just gives us a quick and easy kind of variable expansion, if you will, that references another part of the JSON file. And that can just allow you to reduce some of the boilerplate, some of the copy and paste you have. Works in server JSON files, works in box.json files, works in cfconfig.json files, works anywhere where fine JSON files are being sold. And then finally, I won't show any examples of this, but it is possible for you to create your own custom namespaces. There's an on-system setting expansion interception point that fires every single time command box ever resolves one of these system settings. And so if you wanted to, create your own namespace that was like, an AWS secret store, right? My secret name. And then behind the scenes, you wanted to implement whatever, logic it took to, go find the secret of that name via some HTTP call or, something like that. And you wanted to be able to use that directly in your box.json. You can do that with a command box custom module that you install. It just listens to that on-system, I'm going to say it wrong, the on-system setting expansion interception point, and then it gets the ability to step in and say, ooh, I know how to resolve this one. This is actually the value you're looking for. So completely and totally customizable on top of the existing expansion namespaces that we have. So keep that in mind. That should give you a lot of opportunity inside of your package scripts and your recipes to be able to make stuff just as dynamic as possible, all sitting on top of those system settings. All right, that is it. Happy expanding, everyone. See you next time.